I think it is very easy for Black people to say, our voice isn't being heard. Biracial people's voices aren't being heard. And I'm gonna tell you why this is so close to me. I have a little sister who I don't consider half because I don't like that. Her mother is white. My father is Jamaican. Hearing her experience broke my heart of how Black people treat her. Is your hair weave? You think you're better than me. Oh, you think you're bad, this and that. It's heartbreaking. She has an experience as a biracial woman, and no one allows her to talk. No one allows people like you to talk or you to talk and say, I get discriminated against. People think I'm better than them when I just walked in the room being born how I was born. I didn't do anything. So as Black people, we tend to have a loud voice. Yes, there's colorism and dark-skinned people don't benefit from that. But the people that benefit didn't ask to be there either.
You know I can't help but these, cause they know they can never touch these. So baby, let me talk my shit, or I might just throw another fit.
So for you, specifically, Tiffanie, I'm coming to you, is because you are raising a biracial child.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, as a Black parent raising a biracial child, we're gonna put Megan over there, because I'm assuming that that's not your approach.
Not at all. I was ready to jump in.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So what is your approach? How do you see that as a Black
parent of a biracial child, I refuse to box Jeremiah in. That's my son. He's 10 years old. And I've always told him, since he could talk and he could communicate with me, he's the best of both worlds, right? But his proximity is more to my family because the white side of his family is in California. So he doesn't see them as much. He goes to a Black church. He goes to an all-white school, but he's raised by a Black mom. He goes home to a white dad, but when he's usually around my family. So, I remember maybe just about a year ago, I don't remember, our family was having some kind of conversation, and someone said something about Jeremiah being light-skinned. He was like, I'm not light-skinned, I'm Black. And so it was interesting because I've always told him he's the best of both worlds, but he identifies as Black because he's always around us. He's kind of got that swag, he gotta wear his hoodie, he likes hip hop, all the little nuances that come along with being African American. But at the same time, I'm like, well, you can't just erase your dad's contribution to who you are. But I think because once the summer comes, he gets a little bit more melanin, the sun hits him, you can definitely tell my son is, biracial. And they always say, well, he's like Visa, he's accepted everywhere. But I have to tell him, I raise him in a way to let him know you're gonna come in contact with people that look like your mother. And they're not gonna like you. They're gonna be on guard because they're not gonna trust you, because they're gonna wonder whether you think you're better than them. And I said, your two cousins who are the same age as him, or a year younger, who are both darker skinned like me, I said, there are gonna be places where they go and they're going to be treated differently. And every single time, I'm gonna expect you to stand up for them. Every single time. I was like, because at the end of the day, no one chooses to be in this color skin that they're in, but you can choose to identify how you want to identify, but make sure that you're also protecting those around you who feel ostracized, who feel marginalized, and in this case, happen to be your two cousins who are the same color as your mother. Because you do have light privilege. So I teach him, I have those conversations with him because I don't want him to be shocked when he's around Black people and like, oh, I don't like you because you light skinned. I want you to be prepared for those conversations, but he also already recognizes just from the melanin in his skin that he's kind of the white boys in his school kind of treat him a little differently. He doesn't get invited. He's starting to recognize those things on his own. And because of that, he chooses to identify as, yes, Mom, I'm the best of both worlds, but I feel more comfortable identifying as Black. Because I think also what he sees in society is that just a little bit of melanin can get you in trouble with the police, or just a little melanin, someone's following you around the store, So I think those things he's also starting to, see within himself. But at the end of the day, I make sure to have conversations about both sides of his history. But I don't really have to do too much of the white history. Why? Because he learns it in school. I have to actually teach him his Black history, but he doesn't get it, except for Black History Month. And every month he's like, they're just teaching us about Martin Luther King, Mom. They ain't teach us about nothing else. And you know what I mean? But you and I talked about, even civil rights leaders. A lot of people don't realize Rosa Parks, Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass, August Wilson, one of my favorite playwrights. These people are civil rights leaders. And if it wasn't for them even having using some of their privilege to get into certain spaces that people like us, we would still be sitting at the back of the damn bus. So we can't just completely discount what their contribution is to Black America and some of the freedoms and the things that we've been able to accomplish. But we also shouldn't just say, oh, because of light-skinned people, we got freedom. Come on, son, don't do that.
Right, like that don't make any sense. Thank you for that, Tiffany. Thank you.
Because even the story of Rosa Parks, it wasn't her story.
No, it's not
It
her
was
story.
Paulette Colvin's story.
Exactly.
And because she was the wrong color, because she was too poor, because she didn't have the right optics, they decided to co-opt that story and do it again.
Exactly.
Right.
And they did it again because they did not feel that anyone would have sympathy for a darker skinned somebody.
Do you think do you think it was true though?
Yes.
Do you think
I
that
think
was
it's true that people would not have had sympathy because Black people don't often have sympathy. So like even with the names that you named, Tiffany, I'm also just like, yeah, and these are mixed race and light skinned leaders of the civil rights movement, and I'm just like, and where are the dark skinned leaders? Go ahead, quick, name 3.
Oh my God.
But here's if I can offer something, Donna, because we keep doing that. Let's not do that.
And while I'm not advocating for the divisiveness, right? Because I'm like, I appreciate the use of one's privilege to further a conversation. But at what point do you get out of the way and allow dark-skinned people to speak for themselves? Because is this not the same issue that we often also see where white people don't want to hear about Black issues unless a white person is saying it?
Okay, but
men don't want to hear about women's issues unless a man is saying it.
Donna,
and I'm just like, at some point, I want to be able to talk for myself and be heard without somebody saying you're being divisive or to insert their story here where it did not belong in the first place, like that original interview that you were talking about. Because I'm looking like, well, the fact that you even asked if colorism exists shows me your privilege to believe that it doesn't.
Yeah, that was wild.
She was a total space cadet. Sorry.
She was. I want Nikki.
It's my thing because I feel
Dr.
like
Donna.
what I'm not gonna do is take away someone else's voice, and I'll tell a really quick personal story as to why this activates me. I think it is very easy for Black people to say our voice isn't being heard. Biracial people's voices aren't being heard. And I'm gonna tell you why this is so close to me. I have a little sister who I don't consider half because I don't like that. Her mother is white. My father is Jamaican. Hearing her experience broke my heart of how Black people treat her. Is your hair weave? You think you're better than me. Oh, you think you're bad, this and that. It's heartbreaking. She has an experience as a biracial woman, and no one allows her to talk. No one allows people like you to talk or you to talk and say, I get discriminated against. People think I'm better than them when I just walked in the room being born how I was born. I didn't do anything. So as Black people, we tend to have a loud voice. Yes, there's colorism and dark-skinned people don't benefit from that. But the people that benefit didn't ask to be there either. And we don't give them the room to speak their experience and say, hey, just because I benefit doesn't mean I don't experience prejudice, doesn't mean these same Black people who want agency don't shit on me. I think that's unfair. We can't say as dark-skinned people, you're getting privilege and we don't have a voice when we are sometimes the ones that give the hate to biracial people. That's unfair because they didn't ask to be born how they were born. That's why it's like, yes, we deserve a voice, but so does everyone else.
Thank you, Nikki. I see you shaking your head, Isaam.
I think that their voice is in this lane and that it should be in this lane. I think that you're right. Yes, they should have a voice and those experiences need to be talked about. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is that they're being put at the forefront of the voice of all Black people while they have a biracial experience. And the biracial experience, I'm sorry, is not Black.
But some of the people I just named, Booker T. Washington, I didn't know he was biracial.
Right, he's having a very Black experience.
August Wilson, I didn't know he was biracial. You know, like they just
so you can speak on the Black parents because they have it.
Some people who are darker skinned, and this is again, it can go either way, right? We already know that. I don't know if you're familiar with the Eve gene. A Black woman can have a baby of any race, even if she's with a darker skinned man, right? In any color of the spectrum. So I think we need to be just aware of. Just kind of pigeonholing biracial people and saying that they're at the forefront. But I do agree with you in the fact that darker skinned people, when they have the same experience, or even in corporate America, like someone has the same degree as me, might speak, and they still get paid more. I do think that biracial people need to be conscious of the darker skinned people who've been saying the same thing. It's almost like the same situation with the Kardashians. They're getting getting credit for they're getting credit for prison reform. Everybody knows now there's 4 dark-skinned black attorneys who have been working behind the scenes way before Kim got involved with anything. Let's talk about it. Let's be about it. So why is it, but she's white, but my whole point is the same thing. Is like there are people who are mixed race who are getting credit, but there are people who are also dark-skinned who are not ever being brought. And I would love for interracial people or mixed race people to bring them along and say, yeah, and this person has been fighting even longer than me. Right. I think that's what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying.
Don't forget.
Don't forget.
Us. We've been here.
I do appreciate that nuance because that is what's missing. I want to go to Isaam to see if you have anything to say, and then we can go to you, Shayvawn.
No, what I was thinking while you were talking was, I'm not as concerned. Well, it's not that I'm not concerned about white spaces. My first concern is home, right? So like amongst my people, how do I stand? Where's my voice heard? And so as you're expecting the hand to be held to push you forward, I'm waiting for the hand to be pushed at home and say, no, you are a part of us.
Yeah.
So that when that happens, it feels like, okay, there is representation there, but a lot of times I feel like my voice is muted.
Yeah.
And my experience is, it's all tragic mulatto. Oh, so sad for you.
Yeah,
Your light skin experience. It wasn't that rough. It was rough for me.
Yeah.
It wasn't easy.
And you feel like there were never spaces within the black community where you can be honest about that rough
No,
experience.
not at all.
Yeah.
There wasn't room for it because other voices were louder. Other voices, didn't have a certain privilege that the students in my school felt that I may have had just for being light with green eyes. It's like,
Do you feel that you had privilege?
I didn't, not at all.
You didn't think so?
I didn't feel like I had privilege. Every day I was either bullied, made fun of, talked about at school. Then I would go home and my grandmother would be like, get the black one this. It was always like you go there, not welcome. You go here, not welcome. And so I didn't feel privileged at all. Like I just felt like,
But what about systemically? Did you feel systemically privileged in any way?
Well, my environments were always black. Like I'm raised in a black neighborhood, black school, friends are black, so
Even
outside
in your work
of that,
too.
I didn't get into until I started working for the state, I felt like my voice was being heard and I was able to bring people up and say, because I always wanted community. So it was always my role, I felt, to bring people along with me who spoke about, who knew more, who had more education, who had more knowledge, more lived experience to do that. I don't feel the same way happens when it comes the other way around. So if I go to a casting, we're gonna talk about the black experience, we're casting black men, okay, we can't cast you because you're black, but we can't do that. We can't do that, we're gonna do this. And so I feel it on a lot of different levels, and it's not just so black and white, right?
It's just not so black and
Again,
white.
that goes back to, I think that goes back to proximity of whiteness, because I think why a lot of times interracial people, their voices are not heard in the black community, or the black community isn't as welcoming, is because the perception that white people are going to listen to you and your story all the time because you're interracial, your proximity to them is closer. So we don't have time to listen to you because we're trying to figure out how we're going to get heard. And I think that's what you end up getting. You get into that ditch on accident because it's just like, well, we're not being heard, but we know they're going to listen to you. So your story, we don't need to hear it because you're going to be able to tell it to all of them. The people that we're trying to get to hear our story, because they're going to look at you first before they look at us, because there's that whole hierarchy thing. And I think we have to kind of erase that because they're not really listening to you neither. But in our mind, because your proximity is closer, they're hearing your story. They're looking for you. When they come and say, we want the black experience, they're picking the biracial people, the lighter-skinned biracial people. And I think that's what Donna was talking about, was they don't go for the people that really might have some, they always try to find somebody who is in close proximity to white, and their story might not have been as bad because maybe they were raised by the white parent or they were raised in the white spaces. They never find that interracial person that was in the black community, that was raised by their black family or raised within the black. They always go for that proximity. And so I think we have to stop our perception of who's closer, whose voice is getting heard by them should not be as important. And that's when we can bring in more interracial people into art, into the community.
And I would
Before
argue
you
that
go,
white people don't
before you
listen
go,
to
Dr. Donna,
They don't.
I want to bring Alex into the conversation, and I'd like to hear from you too, Shayvawn, about this idea of privilege. Like, for you, did you feel like you experienced privilege? You talked about West Virginia versus New York and that privilege, but what about with Black folks? How have you been treated?
Oh, I would have to agree with Isaam. It's actually been harder for me to break myself into Black spaces. And I understand like why, and same with what Shayvawn was saying. There is this like, am I safe? Will I be safe around you? Are you here to protect me? And from what I hear, it's what I've come to suggest or come to grapple with. It's all a trauma response, right? We're like all reenacting these like traumas that we've experienced onto each other. And simply, I believe like the only way to have a liberatory future is if we like stop, recognize, and heal that trauma. Because every time you tell me that I might not be safe to you, I totally understand it.
But how does
I
that make
understand
you
what
feel?
it's causing that trauma, right? We're just like continuing to like live in this cycle to where like we are upholding white supremacy by dividing ourselves within this way. They want us to keep dividing ourselves because it makes us smaller in numbers and as a minority. So yeah, I do feel like we just keep like kind of replicating this trauma as a community by telling each other like, I might not be safe around you. I understand, but it is hard to grapple with, and it's taken a lot of work for me to like be able to have these conversations, right? And understand that I do have trauma, but that might be different in different situations, and it might actually be more constant for some people than it is for me.
That's called the push and forget syndrome. That's what I call it. We're pushing you away, so now you're on the outside saying, we're not safe with you. I don't feel like I'm safe with you, so I'm gonna leave you alone. But then I turn around and I forget that I did that, and I turn back around like, why is she standing over there? You think you better than me?
That's so
First of all, I love your syndrome.
It's the push away syndrome. You push and you forget, and then you turn around like, oh, you don't want to sit next to me?
And then you acted so white, and like people just
away.
Come on, Dr.
You just told her she's not welcome, but now you're saying she's too good.
Exactly.
It can't be both, but it's trauma. When you're in trauma and you're in survival mode, you don't be thinking about that kind of stuff. So I want to stay away from you, but I also am looking like, oh, you don't want to sit next to me. Not if you're pushing her. Like you gotta pick a poison.
And it kind of reinforces the social aspect of race, because it isn't a real thing. It's not based on science. It's only subject to who is peddling it. And so if white folks are the ones peddling it, they're the ones making the rules and who gets to be this, that, and the other. But then at a certain point, I think our culture has also shifted towards labeling each other and putting each other into certain categories. Because even as I'm listening to the biracial experience, I can also relate. Even though I'm not biracial, I'm not white and I am not Black. So even as I navigated the American system, because I'm not from here, I also felt very much like put in a box. Or I personally did feel a certain sense of privilege in certain spaces, and I could tell that people treated me differently than they treated my Black friends. And I didn't know how to deal with that. And my parents never talked about race with me, ever, because I don't think they even understood it in the Puerto Rican system either. And so it's very interesting how the human perspective of race continues to put people into categories or continues to other people. At the same time, there's still a very real lived experience to talk about.
I think parents do a really great disservice to kids by not having conversations about race. It's like the same idea of saying, oh, let's be colorblind. No, it's okay to acknowledge that there are these differences and there's the nuances and help them to navigate it. That's how I'm raising my son. Like, I would do him a great disservice if I was just like, all right, you're half Black, half white now. Go out there. No, let me tell you a little bit about your history. You already know American history. You're gonna learn that. Learn your Black history, right? And as a matter of fact, why don't you learn some history about Puerto Ricans and Dominicans? Because you're gonna be mistaken. People talk to him in Spanish all the time. I was like, listen, son, you better learn it now because it's gonna happen. But because he's racially androgynous, they won't know what he is. He usually gets mistaken for a Latino or Latino X. So I think that parents have to, especially if you're in a biracial relationship relationship and you have biracial kids, you cannot ignore their racial makeup. And it is on you to take on the time and the energy to prepare them for what they're going to see and what they're going to experience in the world. Because guess what? As a white man, my ex-husband, he cannot raise my son. He doesn't have the bandwidth or the experience to give him the tools to be prepared to be, he's gonna be a black man. He's gonna be seen as a black man. So now, my partner now who's a black man can tell him, Jeremiah, don't do this. Watch when you do this. Be careful of these. You can't do that. But as a white man, you can say, unfortunately, yeah, I do have some privilege. Here's how they're going to look at you. You know, and as his dark-skinned mom, I can say, hey, you know, this is what you're going to be putting up with. This is what's going to come at you. And some of our own people might reject you. You got to prepare. If you're thinking about getting into interracial relationship, or if you have an interracial child, stop hiding from the conversation.
Stop.
Make it happen.
it.
Talk to them. Have empathy. Ask what they're experiencing at school, how they feel when they see images of black men or white people, black men dying at the hands of police when their dad is white and their mom is white. Ask them how they feel. I make my son sit with me. I'm like, no, we're not running. Watch, how does that make you feel? Because one day you're going to drive. I know how I feel when you're going to get your license. You know, and I can tell you certain things, but at the end of the day, I still need your entire support system, my brother, even your father, to say, here's how you navigate it. And unfortunately, we know you might not make it out. Yeah. You might not make it out alive, but at least we had those conversations. So if you're a parent of a mixed race child, stop doing this colorblindness. You are hurting your children.
Yes.
Yeah.
Talk about it.
Especially
Thank
since
you.
the
Thank you,
majority
Tiffany.
of children
Thank you,
will
Tiffany.
be multiracial.
Exactly.
And are multiracial.
Exactly. And we're gonna come back to that. I want to go to Shayvawn because I know she had something to say, and then we'll come to you, Flora.
I'm trying to figure out how to articulate, because I don't want to dismiss the experiences of other biracial or light-skinned or mixed race people by saying that our struggles were. I wouldn't feel too bad for us. That's all that I'm trying to say. I think because what we're worried about having our identity affirmed when you have darker skinned people who are worried about their humanity being affirmed. It's not the same type of existence, and it's not the same type of struggle or concern about their existence. Our concerns about our existences are completely different. And so I hear, especially what you're saying about your sister and what she had to go through. I also at the same time feel like it's just, I don't know, it just doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel the same to me, and it doesn't feel like it needs the same type of...
The stakes aren't the same.
Yeah.
Do they have
It's
to
a
be?
very different thing.
Well, maybe not do they have to be, but I guess when we're asking if we hear like about the biracial experience, and from my experience, I'm like, maybe it's because my mom is half white, but I feel that I've been steeped in that, and I have felt like, yes, sometimes there might be someone who is cold to me when I first meet them, but I'm confident upon actually having conversations with them that we could get along, and if not, that's their decision and their choice. But I have never felt like the Black community has disregarded biracial people or light-skinned or mixed race people. I felt the most love from the Black community. So I don't know if I necessarily agree with the fact that our experiences have not been talked about.
There was a study that came out a couple of years ago, I think around 2011, 2012. I'll see if I can find the information that talked about how a lot of biracial or mixed race people kind of feel more accepted by the race that typically is oppressed as opposed to the race that is more oppressive. And I don't think that we can completely discount that. As a matter of fact, I sent you some articles about how it's mixed race boys or interracial boys tend to identify as Black when there are two races, as opposed to mixed race or biracial women who tend to identify as multiracial. So I think that experiences,
Because of
exactly.
masculinity goes with darker skin. So in trying to maintain one's hold on masculinity, you're going to identify as Black. Because in doing so, you have now affirmed that you are indeed a man's man. Whereas if you are a woman and you identify yourself as Black, you've actually just removed some of your femininity.
Yes.
Exactly. So think about Drake. I mean, didn't he just do a song talking about he really a dark skinned dude? I'm like,
I'm sorry, I don't know nothing about
I'm
that.
not saying that he's worthy of being paid attention
I
to.
can't.
I'm not saying that he's worthy
I
of being paid attention to, but I am saying that like in trying to affirm his masculinity in that way, he's also trying to say that like, yeah, I am the darkest skinned, light skinned dude that you will ever meet in your
I get
life.
that.
And
I get
he
that.
said something along those lines. And to what y'all are talking about, we're talking about proximity in multiple ways, right?
Yes.
Both proximity to whiteness as well as proximity to blackness.
Yes.
And how everybody is wanting a piece. Even white people want a piece of
Yes.
proximity to blackness because
There's
it's
strength.
the culture of cool.
Yeah.
It's the
Of
culture.
strength
It's the
and
thing that they
resilience.
use also. It's monetized.
Oh, yeah.
It's commodified as fuck,
Oh,
right?
yeah, 'cause
Like,
that
how much
lane-
did Kardashians make? Like their mediocrity was only, they got to flourish because they were pulling from black culture because a touch of exotic other makes you better if you're white.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
and
Right?
a woman.
And I would also say that blackfishing happens, but we don't want to talk about the blackfishing. Like the blackfishing that happens, they're trying to be mixed.
Yes.
They're not trying to be black. They're trying to be mixed.
And just so people can know who are watching this, blackfishing is essentially when people who are white or European or other or whatever are essentially putting on darker makeup, not to look black,
Hashtag.
but to
But to look
appear
mixed.
biracial.
Because they
Yes.
want the touch of the so-called exotic
because
other
it's
without
cool.
ever having to denigrate
Experience.
themselves
Yes.
to actually be the thing, right? So like there were, how many professorships were taken over by so-called light-skinned or mixed-race black women who turned out to just be white people?
Yes.
A la
Right?
Rachel.
Rachel.
Yeah. But more than that.
And
much
this
more
is
than that.
a constant thing. And
Yeah.
I know that like people, I know that there's a sensitivity around the so-called gatekeeping of blackness, right? White people have gate-kept whiteness, but black people have never been allowed to gatekeep blackness. And in wanting to gatekeep that blackness, it's almost as though no one wants to understand why blackness is being gatekept while the gates have been thrown open and white people keep robbing it for all its fucking worth. And there's very little that is actually being done. So I'm not saying that is mixed race people's responsibility,
Right.
but it is something that then is like, wait, how are you identifying and how are you behaving? And I really love what you said about the difference between affirmation of self versus affirmation of personhood, because let's be real, that is written in actual books that dark-skinned people are simply not people.
Right.
Right.
That they are animals, that we are most related to monkeys, that we don't feel pain, that we're not actual people. And so it is okay to denigrate and harm dark-skinned people. Light-skinned and mixed-race people's humanity is not in question.
I think
They are people, but I'm not saying that they're also always well-treated people, because I agree. I think that the harm that comes, I'm like, that harm is not okay. Color-based prejudice is not okay. Any more than colorism is okay, but colorism is a system and color-based prejudice is not. So I'm like, yes, you experience racism and you may experience color-based prejudice, but ultimately colorism is not yours to experience. And when dark-skinned people are trying to hang on to humanity and you're saying, but affirm me, I'm looking like, well, black people, dark-skinned black people have, by and large, embraced light-skinned and mixed-race people. There's plenty of statistics on that. And I'm not just talking about the one-to-one shit. I'm talking about the system of what it freaking looks like, right? They're by and large. I'm not saying that there are not people who do not have fucked up experiences, because let's be real, everybody's got fucked up experience somewhere. But I put this on, but I put this shit like on white people, right? I'm like, number one, I blame white supremacy for all of this shit because that's where the true blame belongs. But also, who here wants to hear about white people's fucking issue with racism?
I don't.
Nobody.
And unfortunately, we do have to wrap, but I do want to get to a couple more. I know, it's just so quick.
We can't end there.
I know. We're not gonna end there.
I'm like, wait, what?
No, I want to go to Florida because I know you wanted to talk, and I want to come back to this table too. So go ahead.
Okay, so I do want to say the white people teaching in black universities and classes, that's happening in the Afro-Latina community, right, as well. or they're teaching, leading Afro-Latino classes, seminars,
And
etc.
they are not
and
black.
they look like me or whiter, and they shouldn't be leading and they shouldn't be teaching those classes and taking up that space. That's one. Regarding your biracial son and sort of this rejection a little of his dad's side, the white side, I feel part of that is like you're educating him on reality, history. And naturally, I think when people say, am I supposed to hate my white side? I feel like, yeah, kind of, a little. I feel like you should.
I can give you information and you do with what you will.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
really how I lay
I
it
mean,
out.
I think that that's what's happening.
Especially like on the college level where now you're an adult, right? I think you should be, I think you should sort of, I did not care nothing about no Spain until, and then it turned out that, I took a Spanish literature course before and I visited Spain. It turned out that the part of Spain that I was actually attracted to turned out is Andalusia, it's called. Happens to be the part where most likely the Spaniards that went to DR were from. So there was like an actual connection, but like Spain as a whole, I didn't care, I could care less.
Yeah.
And I didn't, you should hate part of that history.
Ooh, that's rough. The comment section's gonna be like, ooh. But I do think that that's a great point because that's kind of like what we're getting to is like, is there? How do you reconcile that? But I know that you look like you wanted to say something, Isaam. You went like this.
Yes.
So I need to know what you're thinking.
Because to me, it's not, I don't care how big your dick is, right? So like, I don't want to compare dicks. I don't want to compare pain. Like, oh, your pain is worse. No, my pain is worse. Like, we all experience pain and yours is valid. Your voice is important. We need to share and be on the same page. And a lot of times it sounds like she said, we kind of care, but we don't really. And that's a continuous conversation. And I get it. Don't get me wrong, Donna. I get it. But at the same time, like how you say, I'm sure you experienced some pain. And I'm like, damn, go ahead and minimize my shit.
That hurts. That hurts.
Minimize
Or to
it
say
to
my
a
humanity
cult.
hasn't, or to say my humanity hasn't been under question growing up in West Virginia. Like I was scared
or
for
my
my
safety,
life.
I wasn't jumped just for being mixed or just like hunted every day. Like to say that my safety wasn't something I should be concerned about, or like when going to like dark and brown spaces that I shouldn't be like, am I safe with you? Like, are you going to welcome me? Are you going to turn your back on me? Are you going to feel insecure? Are you going to be triggered by just my face alone that then all of a sudden you turn on me? Like there's a lot of stuff, but I don't think we do ourselves a service when we start comparing apples and oranges and like da-da-da-da. Like it's good to share it so that we're all
But you have to
informed.
compare. The only thing I don't agree with is comparing like this pain is no greater than this pain. Because I think I know from my perspective, I feel like the Black community is always looking like how hard are we finna fight for this? And when we look at the levels of pain, somebody who is fighting for their life is gonna fight different than somebody who is fighting for the front spot at the line at the grocery store. Not saying that that's what, like, it's not diminishing, but you do have to look at the levels of pain because when it comes down, when the dogs are let out, I know I don't have nowhere to go. But I have to figure out, based on your pain or what you've experienced, are you going to be standing next to me, or am I going to look and there's going to be an empty space? Because I know I can't go nowhere.
But if you push me, are you expecting me to stand next to
Well,
you?
that's why I don't push
before?
people. But I'm just saying that that level of pain you have to look at because the fight is different. I know some people who, when I was in school, I was always black this, black that, because I didn't have no choice but to be. Because if I didn't make that space for myself, it wouldn't be made. But then I had other friends who were light-skinned biracial who didn't fight as hard and who would kind of like be there. But then once things started getting tough, they're like, well, maybe we should. And they kind of backed up. But they had that ability to do that, and I didn't.
But I'm sorry that we have to represent that pussy-ass person who didn't fight.
And that's not the term we should
fighting.
use for that.
Right.
But that's not the term. But
Shayvawn, you want to go? We can give you the last word.
No, it's not that I want to minimize, because I have been through that as well. So I acutely understand what it feels like to be in Black spaces and not be fully Black. I get that. I feel that I am trying to highlight the factual, statistic supported differences in our existences. And we have to be honest and open about that if we wish to dismantle colorism, which comes from white supremacy. And I will say that as a Black person, as Black people, we have had our humanity dismissed but it's not in this, I will say that again, it is not in the same way that darker skinned people have had that happen to them. Historically, statistically, in prisons, you can name it.
Pick your area.
Yeah, it's not the same. And I hope that in having these conversations and hearing that out loud, because that's a real thing, light-skinned people don't take that as an attempt to push us out. It's actually just getting us to be honest with and reckon with how we are treated differently versus our dark-skinned brothers and sisters.
And
But that's assuming that that's how they all think, right? And so you're putting that on every light-skinned person that we don't think like that.
I want to end there because I think that that's a strong way to end because the conversation continues. Listen, the point of this wasn't even to have a debate.
Yeah.
The point of this conversation was more so to actually talk about what's happening, the actual reality of what's happening. And according to my ears, what I'm hearing is that there is a lot of trauma, right? There's a lot of trauma, like you said, Alex, and people are just doing the best that they can do. But the best that we can do is that we have to acknowledge what's really, really happening. There are these systemic ways that things are happening, and then there are these more personal things that are happening. And sometimes they get conflated, but they both matter. And I'm trying to figure out, like, as a creator, as someone who really believes that conversations begin change, I'm trying to figure out, like, how can we have the fucking conversation honestly, first and foremost? You brought this up too, Alex. We are living in a world that is getting more multicultural, whether you fucking like it or not. There is going to come a point where the majority of the people that exist, especially in a country like this, are going to be of mixed race. They're going to be biracial, multiracial. If we want to have the world that we say we want to have, which is a world where little kids don't give a fuck about color and they just want to be happy and skip in the fields, that also means that those children potentially are going to wind up being with each other as adults, right? It's going to mean that the future says that things are going to look differently. And I think that as Black people, phenotypically, obviously Black people, we have to reconcile with that as well. We have to reconcile with the fact that things are changing, that it's painful, and because we just feel like y'all just started acknowledging that we exist 4 seconds ago because of Issa and them, and now you telling me that I can't even speak for myself. It's a lot to reckon with, but we have to be honest and we have to continue this process. You know, I'm gonna let you get the last word and close, Eliana, but I think, like, for me, I really appreciate all of you for being here, for being honest and exposing this. This is a part of the process to get where we want to get next, to be honest about this and to hear about the experience of biracial folks.
Yeah.
I want biracial people to be able to be biracial instead of everybody telling you that you're Black, because I get confused too. Now we all confused. I'm confused, you confused. During the 90s, like, a lot of the Black people were Afro-Latinos. I'm like, you look like me, but not really all the way. It was just a lot of that, and it's starting to change, but it's gonna change even more. And I'm like, buckle up, get ready, motherfuckers. So, thank you so much, Flora. Thank you so much, Juice. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Isaam. Thank you so much, Dr. Donna. Thank you, Shayvawn. Thank you, my love, our newest most edition, Tiffanie. Eliana, you know, you're an amazing co-host. I'll let you close out the show, but I really appreciate y'all for this. It was very brave.
Yeah, seriously, thank you so much. As we were trying to put the show together and thinking up questions and how we're gonna navigate the conversation, I even realized that, we don't have a lot of examples of having an actual conversation about the experience. Not how do you identify, how do you, navigate, but the actual experience of the biracial identity and why it is that you move the way that you move, alongside Black folks who don't have the luxury of passing for anything other than Black. And so for us, it was really important to, kind of really highlight that in a way that was responsible, which hopefully we did today, but also highlighting, the experiences of seeing people who are racially ambiguous with the Black label, teaching about anti-Blackness, almost using it as a form of blackfishing in order to capitalize off of that. I personally, in the anti-racist space that I came from, saw that a lot, where people all of a sudden were Black teaching about anti-Blackness, teaching about colorism, and you're kind of confused about, like, oh, when did that happen? And why isn't a person who isn't racially ambiguous teaching about Blackness or teaching about anti-Blackness in particular? So we are in a very interesting time, in particular after 2020. So we really appreciate you being here. And I hope that we can continue having these conversations.
Of course. So for y'all at home, please follow us at The Stranger Fruit. Follow all of these beautiful people on this panel, and we will see you next time. Peace. Like Martin, peace.